Welcome everybody back to the 6.5 podcast. This week, I'm the host, Daniel Newman, principal analyst, founding partner at Futurum Research, joined by my esteemed colleague in crime for our 76th episode of the 6.5 podcast, Mr. Patrick Moorhead. Good morning, sir.
Daniel, how you doing? It's Friday morning, and we all know what that means. Another exciting installment of the 6.5. It's going to be a beautiful weekend here, and I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's become our thing. At some point, the world may force us to not pod on Friday mornings, but as long as we sort of have this rhythm going, and it gives us the week, this way we really do bring you all the biggest analysis from the tech events, the tech news that'll drop in any given week. But who knows, maybe we'll be podding 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe soon we'll be podding from locations that aren't our home. I mean, we are actually getting out of the house pretty soon to travel to an undisclosed location to do a very fascinating interview with we'll just say a CEO of a very large technology company, but we can't say anything more than that, but soon we will. Let's do the disclaimer stuff, huh? This show is for information and entertainment purposes only, and while we will be talking about publicly traded companies, please do not take anything we say as investment advice. Information and entertainment. And just for anybody out there that has not been listening to the past 75 episodes of the 6.5, we focus the show on breaking down the news with more analysis than news. Just enough news so you know what we are going to be talking about, but not so much news that you could just get it by reading any other publication. We want to break it down. We want to go deep. We want to keep you thinking. And Pat, we got that today because we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about Dell's big event this week. IBM's dropped some news, a couple earnings, and of course, Microsoft had an event. And Pat, it's nicer in Texas than it is here in Illinois. Can't wait to leave this place.
It's so close. I mean, I'm going to have the freaking welcome wagon show up for you. Maybe some circus animals, clowns, balloons, all that stuff. I cannot wait for you to move to Texas, and that's TECHSYS.
Texas, baby. All right, so let's break it down. You ready to go?
Let's do this. Let's light this candle.
Let's light the candle, Mr. Moorhead. So let's start off talking about Dell Technologies World. And I want to dive in specifically and talk about Project Apex. And I'll just start off another event that used to have a massive sprawl, multiple days, tons of speakers, generally was in Austin for a long time, then moved to Las Vegas. And now it has moved to our home office, or in your case, the offices that you domicile in there in downtown Austin. But good event. But this year, the show and all the upfront work that we as analysts did, alongside Dell, had a lot to do with the company's migration to consumption-based services. So this week, the company rolled out its Apex portfolio. And this is a series of as-a-service offerings, starting with storage, compute, moving towards things like PC, data processing, SAP, and like we've heard from a few other companies, namely HPE, but even if you look at what AWS and Azure are doing, moving towards everything in a consumption-based format. So, coming straight out the gate, Apex is really focusing on 2 things. The 2 biggest things I'll say is the data storage and the cloud services. A couple of other things definitely were interesting. The custom solutions that Dell continues to do, along with the Apex console, which is going to be the portal that is going to be a very important kind of epicenter of the Dell Apex offering. And the reason I really point that out is because what we've got going on is we've got these 2 converging forces, Pat, and it's basically we've got the big public cloud players migrating more and more and more and more, and you see my hand moving if you're watching this live, but if you're listening, you can't see that. Moving more and more towards prem. And then you've got all the prem providers. You got the Cisco with their new Cisco Plus, you got HPE, you got now Dell, all kind of saying, hey, we understand there's still a lot of workloads that need to go on-prem. We're going to build a public cloud consumption-like offering, and we're going to move it more and more and more and more and more towards public. And so my take was Dell is off to a good start. It's a company that you have to take very seriously. It's got a world-class sales force. It will be able to use that sales force and that gigantic customer database to be able to sell these solutions early on. I like the fact that they're starting small with a few services, because even if you look at AWS started off with one thing, storage, and then it went to compute, and that was how it effectively grew its business. Same thing's going to happen here with Apex. I'm going to leave a little oxygen in the room for you, Pat. That's kind of a running joke on this show for all of our first-time listeners. But, I just want to say this. Dell is kind of looking at the market in two ways. Dell wants to be seen in the market as a force to be reckoned with in competing with the big public cloud players. I think in time, I never would write off Michael Dell and say he will not be able to accomplish this. I will also say there are very formidable prem-based competitors that are doing this, that have been doing this in some cases, Lenovo with TrueScale, HP with GreenLake, for years now. They understand a lot of the bumps and bruises, the complexities, what customers want, and Dell needs to get over that hump first. If Dell can get over that hump, prove its business model, build a control plane that people like, scale it up, certainly the company knows how to do services. Certainly the company has a big backlog of subscription from its financial services business, but it's going to be a road to hoe. I want to kind of hear about it in the earnings. I want to start off hearing about customer wins, and I want to start to see the financial growth, and then eventually I want to see if the company can compete and convince the market that the hybrid environment starts with your IT prem provider and not your public cloud provider. But in the end, Pat, I think it's going to end up being a mix of both.
As a service for everything is what customers want, whether you're a large company, mid-sized, or a VSB, a very small business like us. And that's where the market's headed. And this is where Dell is taking it. A couple things to keep in mind on this, things that really came out here. First of all, Dell's scale. You look at their market share as it relates to server, storage, networking, HCI, PCs. It's gigantic. So the scale at which Dell Tech operates is very different from the scale that some of the other companies are operating at. So they have scale and they have breadth of product line. A couple things that I was really impressed with. So first off, the language that they used was understandable. They used the language of the cloud, of the public cloud, which quite frankly is the language that I don't want to call it the winning language, but it's become a language that customers can understand pretty well. And one really interesting thing that I was thinking through here when I stood back, Apex is getting so close to the public cloud when you look at the deal and what they're doing with Equinix. So if you are if you're a Dell Tech customer and you don't want to have on-prem infrastructure, you can put it inside of Apex. And guess what? You're not going to get two bills. You're going to get one bill, and it's going to be from Dell Tech. Dell wasn't the first to use Equinix, but Dell's the first one to have one throat to choke while using Equinix, and that's what customers want. When you sign up for AWS or Azure or GCP or IBM or Oracle Cloud, you get one bill, not two bills, and people pointing their fingers at each other. It'd be interesting. The other part is the 14-day guarantee, okay? And I think that is mind-blowing for something that's going to be on-prem and new. Now, if you already have hardware or infrastructure involved, right, you can essentially tap into that in less than 5 minutes at an infrastructure. But the interesting thing I was thinking about was, what if Dell invested CapEx in installing hardware and capabilities ahead of when a customer actually asks for it? And you've got a single pane of glass. Isn't that kind of like the public cloud now? It absolutely is, but don't tell anybody, Daniel. I don't think any of these on-prem companies who are putting these as a service opportunities want to get there until it just shows up. But I just find that incredibly fascinating that literally if they pre-bought, put CapEx and put infra into Equinix ahead of the curve and then put a credit card and a sign up, you have the public cloud, baby.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, it'll come down to ownership. Who owns the actual infrastructure? If Dell owns it, it basically is a public cloud. If it becomes something that the user ends up owning the infra, and like you said, you are right. I do think that would be a hard road to go down. It'll be very competitive, but like I said, I've got a lot of confidence in Dell. Everything Michael does is very well thought out. We've seen it. A lot of times people might not understand it, but trust me, he's brilliant. All right, with that, Pat, we got to keep moving on. I know that was the big news of the week. And by the way, there's a lot more at Dell Tech World than that, but unfortunately this show is 6 topics, 5 minutes each, or 8 minutes each sometimes. But IBM, we've got a couple pieces of news on IBM this week. But quietly, IBM is a very big influencer in the semiconductor space. People don't always notice that because it isn't one of the common names, the Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, Qualcomms that tend to get called out a lot. But from a research standpoint, the company's been doing some really interesting things. It had a pretty big breakthrough this week. Pat, I'll let you start that one out.
Yeah, so IBM is a huge player in semiconductors. They license their IP to both Intel and Samsung, and likely some other unnamed people who want that to be confidential. When I was at AMD, we were licensing a ton of IP from IBM when we had our own fabs. Now, this big announcement was the first 2 nanometer nanosheet device that was announced. And so, first of all, for those who aren't chip-licious people and don't love chippery, essentially, the smaller the geometry or the nanometer, the lower the power or the higher the performance. You pick one or the other, or a combination both is what you get. So you want your smartphone to last longer, go to 2 nanometer. You want to have higher performance at the same wattage, you go a lower nanometer. And then there's this thing called nanosheets, and nanosheets are basically made of graphene, and it's a different type of insulator that goes on there. It's been tested down to 1 nanometer so far, but these devices are 2 nanometers. So 2 big impacts here. First is that IBM will be able to license this technology to both Samsung and Intel and others who wish to be not named. And secondly, they can use them in their own products, their Power and also Z. But it's very, very cool. IBM's talking about 45% higher performance, as I said, or 75% lower energy use than compared to the current 7 nanometer node. So pretty awesome stuff.
This is a really interesting one for me, Pat. We've been watching this industry very close, and just a few weeks ago, Intel made some announcements at their IDM 2 event, and one of their 4 big announcements was about the partnership the company has with IBM Research, which, by the way, kind of was quiet because when you talk about building new foundry service, new fabs, major investments, sometimes those kinds of parts of the announcements can kind of go under the radar. But let's not forget to share with the market. I mean, IBM had some very leading edge type of breakthroughs with 7 and 5. Was very early to the game there, and people, like I said, don't remember that because we think about TSM at the leading edge mostly, already talking about 3 nanometer. We think about what Intel is doing. The other thing, though, Pat, that is really interesting, and I think warrants some discussion, I'd love to get your take on this because we haven't actually talked about it yet, but how IBM monetizes and commercializes these breakthroughs. So up to this point, of course, IBM has their Z, the mainframes, and has Power and some of their, compute that they run on their Linux kernel that they use their chips for. But largely, IBM has not really been front and center in terms of taking this technology and scaling it to market, putting it in foundries, having it used in a lot of different designs, or having at least notoriety for its use in a lot of different designs. Do you think this 2 nanometer breakthrough is an opportunity, whether it's on the mobile side with someone like a Samsung, a partnership, whether it's with Intel, to commercialize and further help the market see a growth opportunity for IBM for its semiconductor success research and its ability to get to market early in terms of the research and development side?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, they've been doing this for 25 years. It's just been under the radar. Now, it made a lot more sense when they had their own fabs, right? And they actually technically do have a test fab still for some of the photonic stuff, but they've been doing this for forever. It's super high margin. It's not, I don't think it's revenue that would essentially, swing anybody around the room. But I'm continually amazed at how ahead of the curve they are. And it really, the Intel announcement was breakthrough, Daniel, because Intel for 25 years did it alone, right? And it's nice to see them working with IBM. And I think what we saw in terms of overall Intel IDM 2.0, Intel realizes it can't go at it alone, right? It needs more fab partners. It needs more tech partners to make that happen. And I don't see that as a weakness. I see that as a pragmatic, good decision.
Yeah, I mean, I feel completely the same way. I think it's just an opportunity, right? IBM breaks through on a lot of technologies, but doesn't always commercialize them as well as they could. You can think about quantum, think about Watson, and think about now all the leadership that it's had in chips over the years. Is there a different go-to-market approach, especially now that they're spinning off Kyndryl, their IIT managed services, and focusing more, of course, on the hybrid cloud business? But this is a huge business opportunity, and to be at the leading edge and to be early with these technologies, there's a bigger monetization opportunity that probably warrants some thought. And I'm sure IBM is doing it. It's a massive company. I'm sure they're looking at this and thinking about it. But Pat, it would be remiss of us as analysts to not at least look at the opportunity and say, hey, could IBM take this to market in a way where they A, get more credit, and B, drive more revenue beyond what they're doing in their current business today? But we're not going to answer that today.
Sounds like a great analyst project, Daniel. So
yes, it sounds like an opportunity. Anybody that might want to talk more about this happens to listen to this cast, maybe they should reach out to us. Maybe we should have one of the execs on this show on our Insider Edition. All right, let's keep going, Pat. So, my favorite thing to talk about on the show are always the earnings. I love making those ties from earnings to strategy. We do that different, and we think we do it maybe better than most. And the thing is earnings are the moment of truth, as you always like to say. It's the most honest a company will ever be about how well its strategy is working out. And this week, not nearly as many earnings as last week, but there were a few, and T-Mobile had a very, very good result.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to characterize this is T-Mobile tired of winning so much, right? If you look at the U.S. market, you have AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, and others, right? And if you look at Verizon's strategy, it's content, and they just realized that buying aged content is not the way to go, and they're selling that off. You had AT&T, who got into everything from HBO to Disney to ESPN, and investors don't like that. And then you have T-Mobile sticking to their swim lane and just absolutely crushing it. And in Q1, what really stuck out for me were the net adds, right? In this business, it's net adds, 1.4 million. That means they took 1.4 million postpaid away from AT&T and Verizon, and it just continues. Net income was almost $1 billion a quarter. Do you like that? $1 billion a quarter. And one of the reasons I like this story so much is T-Mobile got no respect about 5 years, none. The only company that got less respect was Sprint, and they combined. And a lot of people are like, oh, two has-beens combining, but now they are kicking AT&T and Verizon's butt, particularly on consumer side, playing the Un-carrier, and it just keeps moving on. If you look on a 5G basis, basically giving away free 5G phones and getting that mid-band 5G has been the magic over and above their competitors' C-band, which isn't even there yet. And these weak millimeter wave that, my gosh, we don't even have millimeter wave in Austin yet. One of the in Austin, Texas, with a TECH. So again, I hate to be blathering on and on here, but is T-Mobile tired of winning yet? Apparently not.
Hey, listen, if Texas, my soon-to-be home, could actually do a little work on getting a few more towers up, that would be great. I kind of have less than impressive cell coverage, but it's kind of like when you go to Barcelona for Mobile World and you're supposed to be like in one of the tech hubs of the world, and you can the Wi-Fi is like, you're getting like 2 megabytes up and down.
We're Austin's an AT&T city when it comes to tower coverage.
But T-Mobile needs to figure out a way to draft off that. We know these companies are pretty creative and clever at using and sharing the bandwidth to make sure that they charge each other. That's how it's always been. But Pat, listen, you hit it on the head. I mean, look, the T-Mobile run, I mean, over the last like 5 years has really been insane to watch. This company was kind of an afterthought. It was like, oh, you can't afford Verizon, you can't afford AT&T. Oh, sure, you could go with T-Mobile. I just want to raise my hand and say I've been using T-Mobile now for 6 years here in Chicago. I believed in it. I really loved the no penalty and the fact that the company had the ambition to start paying people to switch. And why did I love that so much? Well, look, in this business, this is a recurring revenue stream. Selling the phones, not a big deal. It's that every single month that 4, 5, 6 iPhones or smart devices in the household, all at $100 or more per person, in perpetuity. And then these companies are adding services on demand. They're adding in-app purchasing. They're adding different media services to up-level the businesses. Of course, Verizon actually just spun off most of its media, worth pointing out. But it's just a really, really smart business. And it's been an interesting transition with the new CEO coming in, because it was such like an over-the-top, on fire kind of brand. And now it seems to be kind of humbling into a little bit more of a, we are the leader now, and acting a little bit differently. But man, when the company was a disruptor, it was fun to watch. It was fun to watch it just take market share quarter. Well,
Daniel, that's a great observation on it. And when you have CEOs, they're different personalities, but T-Mobile CEO is very much aggressive guy. He's not wearing hats during earnings calls yet. But it's still pretty much orange and upbeat. I think they have to do that to get into the commercial side of the business. T-Mobile launched some really exciting enterprise and commercial services and capabilities that, oh, by the way, I am going to try out. T-Mobile sending me a 5G hotspot that I'm going to park right outside my window. And that's very much aligned with all of the CIO conversations that I'm having, and I'm sure you're having, Daniel. But we must move on here.
Yeah, I know. I get excited. It's earnings. Look, last thought, Mike Sievert doing a great job. John Legier, he was a fire starter. So it was a perfect transition. Excited to kind of watch how it continues to emerge and grow this space. All right, Pat. We're going to circle back. Let's talk about IBM again. Yes, I know. IBM is an old company, but it is new again. And sometimes what's old is new again. And let's talk about mainframes, and let's talk about Linux, and let's talk about some technology, new technologies that are coming out. And this week, IBM announced a couple things. Let's halvesy this one. Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
They came out with a new Linux box, the LinuxOne 3 III Express model. I never know how that's supposed to be said out loud. And then they came out with some new mainframe. Basically, on the LinuxOne, it came down to IBM identifying a really interesting opportunity to play a little bit down market, using its capacity, using its economies of scale. And with this new box, they're basically coming in with a smaller, faster time to market, with all of its baked-in services that are in its big Z mainframes, things like HyperProtect and confidential computing, to be able to address two markets. One, they're addressing the down market opportunity in database services, and two, and the one that I think is potentially most interesting, is coming out with a box that really can address the growing demand for fintech. And you hear so much about crypto and what's going on in this space. Well, one of the big problems is you need this type of technology of what is in the LinuxOne and in the Z mainframes to be able to do these fintech, to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. Problem, these boxes are expensive. I mean, you're talking about well over $250,000, in many cases into multiple millions. It's kind of like the supercomputers of of the mainframe world. And a lot of times these startups that are doing really interesting things, whether it's crypto mining or fintech services, they don't have millions and millions of dollars. So they want to do this type of stuff using cloud, but that's not the opportunistic or ideal place to be doing this stuff. So IBM said, we're going to take advantage of economies of scale. And we're going to build a box that you can get for just the price of a small house, about $135,000, that would enable you to take advantage of the technology of IBM LinuxOne and to be able to concurrently use it in deploying your fintech or some of these database services. Now, it's a big addressable market that IBM has primarily been missing because of their entry point being so high. So that's kind of interesting. It is, from a competitive standpoint, Pat, as I see it, probably the biggest disruptor will be IBM and Oracle going toe-to-toe here on some stuff, because this really starts to compete with the database appliances, Exadata systems that have come from Oracle, where Oracle has been very successful. But I mean, what's more fun than watching IBM and Oracle compete? Two big tech companies that have been around forever that are still in this business. Overall, I think this is a big opportunity. I mean, what I look at here is the volume is big. It addresses a new part of the market. The team, Ross Maury and the team over at IBM Systems and Z, has been very good, very creative. And by the way, this business, we talked about their very profitable power and chips business, Pat. This is another real windfall business for IBM. Everybody says what's old is old. Well, you and I have to agree what's old is new. And the fact is, they've identified a market here. It's a highly profitable part of the business. In the cycles when IBM comes into market with the big Z, the most recent being the Z15, but with these LinuxOne, it can be the difference sometimes between IBM being able to deliver a quarter of profit and not being profitable is their mainframe business. So adding to the lineup, expanding down the market, and competing in a space where there's more volume opportunities was a good move, and something I'm bullish on from IBM.
Yeah, the same day as the new LinuxOne came out, IBM came out with its, I like to call it, these are my terms, not their, mainframe as a service. IBM Z, like you said, was 49% growth last quarter, which is mind-boggling. And if OS updates had come in, entire systems would have been up in a huge way. But just to set the stage here, so IBM already has a public cloud. It's primarily x86 based. It does have IBM Z, and I do believe it has some power in there. IBM also has satellite, which is very similar to, let's say, a Google Anthos and a AWS on-prem infrastructure as well. But hey, what about mainframes, right? Mainframes, almost by definition, have always been on-prem, and typically, right, you buy the hardware and then you license the software. IBM Z already went software by consumption, and I wrote about that on Forbes, and I wrote a new Forbes column where they're actually using burst performance as a service. Okay, so IBM is essentially doing software as a service, and when I mean as a service, I mean licensing, and also the peak hardware. And without getting into some of the names that only IBM Z clients would understand, like MLC, MSU, R4HA, and SCIRT, I'm going to just try to simplify it for the broader audience. And it's interesting, the only thing that IBM would have to do to go as a service is to go as a service for that initial purchase, which I believe they're already doing under certain managed contracts. But essentially, what we talked with Dell, which is opening that up to more customers. I don't know. It makes a lot more sense, particularly now that you can get IBM Z in standard rack sizes with standard power, where if you wanted to replace a bunch of x86 servers, you can plop one of these or a LinuxOne in its place. And, it does kind of scramble my brains a little bit to think that a mainframe that runs Red Hat Linux that uses containers and can go multi-cloud. Like it's basically a giant server. Yet we call it a mainframe. Yet it's essentially a giant scale up server. Cool stuff. Ross and his team are just kicking butt over there, and it's really fun and exciting to watch.
Yeah, it really is. It goes against the grain. Like I said, trying to make a mainframe cool is a really tough job. And I think that's why you and I are giving it so much credit to that team, because not only has it made it cool, but it's also been an extremely important part of the underpinnings of that business.
I like the underdog. I like the underdogs too. I mean, it's like the PC's dead, the mainframe's dead, 49% growth, PC, 52% growth. What's dead again?
Well, actually, right now, anything that needs a chip is alive and well. I don't really care what it is. If it's a car, if it's a TV. No one's going to use a TV because everybody's got an iPad, right? Well, that's not true either. I got a big old TV in my family room, and I like watching it. So you can kind of bite me if you think TVs are going away. Did I say that? I said that. Oh, well, that's part of the show.
Daniel, large screen TVs were at 40%.
I know, but everyone's like, oh, no one's going to watch. We're going to watch on our phone. It's like, no, I don't want to watch TV on this little tiny device. I want to watch it on my 100-inch 4K, 8K, whatever it is, super high resolution monitor. I just want it to look perfect. Anyway, right, we got to keep
Daniel is a millennial, and he's saying this. Okay,
listen to this. I'm a millennial with follicular challenges. So I haven't had hair since my early 20s. Don't know why that happened to me, but is what it is. Hey, Pat, let's keep moving here. More earnings, more takes from you. Let's talk about Lattice Semiconductor. I've got a few opinions, but I'm going to let you go first here.
Yeah, so first off, if you may not be familiar with Lattice CEO, ex-AMDer Jim Anderson, who made AMD famous with Zen, is CEO, and he's just been crushing it over there, and they had a tremendous quarter. So Lattice does the lowest power FPGAs out there, and they can replace controllers. They can replace ASICs, right? You can essentially do an FPGA design a year to a year and a half faster than you can do an ASIC, and it's programmable, which is pretty cool. And they've been crushing it. They've been moving up the food chain, whether it's in 5G base stations, whether it's in cars. Pretty much every Intel and AMD server in a hyperscale data center has a Lattice Semi security chip. Remember a couple years ago the spy chip gate that Bloomberg brought out that freaked everybody out? Well, essentially the first chip now that powers on these hyperscale servers is a Lattice Semi chip. Financially, Jim Anderson has gotten the company in a great spot here. Cleaned up a bunch. Wasn't tremendous amount of growth, but what he did is he kept growth, but he completely turned the offerings upside down, increased the rate of products by 5x if I compare it to the prior administration. But let's talk about earnings now. Revenue up 19%. Gross margin was up. Op Inc was up 2x. Net income was up 2x as well. A ton of new products for the quarter. And I think a real hat tip of the hat, a metric is they joined the S&P Midcap 400, which I think is a nice testament to they're getting bigger and they're getting badder. And I think Lattice's big challenge now is, challenge for a company that grew 19%, is to grow even more, right? They really cleaned up everything, got profitable, got the machine working really well, increasing the amount of products. And I'm expecting 21 and 22 to be growth mode for the company when their new designs, the clutch goes in and they start to see the fruits of their labor.
Yeah, next week the company hosts an investor day. I'll be tuning in among a few other events. What a busy week. We got IBM Think, we got Moor. We got some events to talk to everybody about in the near future. Quick commentary, I'll put some links in the show note. I did a research note on Futurum about Lattice's results. I also published a piece on MarketWatch today highlighting some underappreciated semiconductor companies where I specifically pointed to Lattice, which, by the way, generated over 115 million in revenue. And it's, as Pat has suggested, inside of servers, automobiles, IoT, and automation, industrial applications, in 5G. Their chips are kind of everywhere. They're FPGAs, and the programmability is really a differentiator. They've found their niche, they found an identity. The company is leaning into that differentiation and becoming really the best at what it does. And if you're looking at a company and you're trying to understand an opportunity in a market, sometimes you want the most diversified and the most general purpose, but sometimes you want a company that just says, we are going to be the best at what we do. And that's really what I look at Lattice. It's been very, very steadfast in staying the course, and it's been able to carve out some real growth. I mean, you're talking in the 20% plus rate in that market. All right, Pat, so we're down to our last one. We're going for a land speed record of slowness in terms of getting through our topics. Let's finish out with Microsoft. This week, the company held its Biz Apps Summit. This is an annual event for the company's, SaaS, prem-based applications. You probably know or have heard of Dynamics. Microsoft Dynamics used to be Great Plains, or Dynamics 365 now, which is the cloud-based offering, which is the one that I think is seeing the fastest growth rates in the 40s of percentiles. And there was a lot of news. It was a day and a half. We had an analyst a day, a great wine tasting, and then we had the event itself. A mix of pre-recorded and real-time content and interaction. But this was a moment to get with the senior executives, Alyssa Taylor, James Phillips, I believe is the name, president of the business. Sorry, I just want to make sure I get names right. But and we heard from them. And there was two things I took out of it, Pat. One is always great with applications, SaaS, CRM, to hear customer stories. And I think the company did a really nice job of talking through the lens of customers, how they're applying these technologies, and why. And this is, in my eyes, why the business is growing. The second thing was some new product solution offerings were rolled out. I kind of leaned into one in particular, and that was around the Customer Insights business, or the CDP. For those unfamiliar, CDP, Customer Data Platform, this is the next big frontier for many SaaS companies, whether it's Salesforce, Customer 365 Truth, whether it's Adobe Experience Platform. All these companies are moving up the stack to CDP. CDP is really all about tying first-party and third-party data, being able to truly understand the full 360-degree customer journey, being able to attach, to get that right offer in the right channel at the right time. A big part of that is going to be tying advertising engines to the customer first-party data insights. And so Microsoft did that at their event. They basically announced a more sophisticated integration between Dynamics 365 Customer Insights and Microsoft's advertising platform. But the important thing too, by the way, is Microsoft's ad platform, which is a growing part of the business, because every part of Microsoft is growing, by the way, is that this is being built to not only unify first-party data for advertisers, but it's also being built to work with other third-party advertising systems. So think to yourself things like Google Ads, Marketo, MailChimp, SendGrid, Autopilot. These are all the applications you'll be able to integrate with. But really what it comes down to is, can you access the right data? Can you manage your segments? And can you scale your ads across multiple platforms? And so the reason for this is we want to be able to reach those customers in that right channel, and we want to do it at scale. Companies have become pretty good at segmenting their business. And there's one other big caveat here, Pat, that really everybody that's listening, that's interested in this part of the business needs to pay attention to. And that caveat is that effectively with the ID for Apple and the changes being made to third party to make it harder and harder for companies that have long relied on inexpensive access to people's data without their permission, that's going away. What does that mean? It means every company needs to get more first-party data. They need to build systems that get customers to opt in. So the way you get customers to opt in is by putting the right opportunity to engage them in that right channel where they are opted in, whether that's a Facebook or a Google platform. Get them to come in and be part of your first-party ecosystem so you can eventually target them with the right ads. I feel like Microsoft made a good move here. They're upping the stakes. And again, it's a super competitive space. You heard me mention it. Salesforce, Adobe, SAP, Oracle, all competing, Treasure Data, Segment, and Twilio. But this is a space where I believe Microsoft is going to be effective, especially with up-leveling the business with their existing D365 customers.
Brother, you talked so much that you lost your voice. And I think that's because we're out of time here. Two things that I noticed. It was nice to see Power BI add this goals function, which is very key from just looking at the pretty pictures and charts to know kind of exactly where you are to that. Some pretty sophisticated types of capabilities there. And I thought the big story for me was Microsoft's ability to tell customer stories and tell them very, very well. I think this is important. It's a sizable business, but I think when you're trying to convince people to leave one company and move to the other, you need a lot of these, hey, come in, the water feels great types of things. And finally, Microsoft had the best communication on connecting the front office and the back office. And I would dare say that I've ever seen, literally overlapping worlds coming across and showing the applications and talking about the magic that people can do that. And there's really only 3 companies, at least, that I'm tracking right now that can do that: Microsoft, Oracle, and Zoho. I know Salesforce is going to try to get there, and SAP is trying to get there, but those are the 3 companies that are there already, and that seems to be the trend. Full service providers, front end and back end.
Well, just like the cloud stack, you've got the SaaS stack, and that is taking care of all the functions. That's your back office, that's your human resources, that's your sales, that's your marketing. All right, we could talk about that whole show, own day. See, I left something for you there. You went on for like 2 minutes, so there wasn't nothing left for you. I'm
always going to find something to talk about.
I never leave you nothing, sir. There's always something for you to talk about. But that is a wrap for the show, everybody. Hey, I want to say thanks to all of you out there that tune in. We really do appreciate this community. 76, I cannot believe that. Stay tuned. Big announcements coming on our 6.5 Summit, which is going to be June 14 to 18. We have an unbelievable lineup. I don't want to waste this as the first place to talk about it, so I won't tell you much more right now, but just know in the coming week, there will be some breaking information, unbelievable lineup of speakers. But for this episode, I'm just going to say, hit that subscribe button, follow us on Twitter, stay in touch with us, listen to us on Apple or Spotify, pass this along, watch our videos on YouTube. We love everybody that stays part of this community. Hope you found value in the show. Appreciate you for tuning in. Goodbye. We'll see you later.
Take care.